there's so much to know about the world, and then people will still like be in your face acting like you should have known something about some random topic, and I'm like, fuck all the way off. How many things do I actually know shit about you know nothing about? Like,
Exactly.
it's not possible for all of
No,
us to know all the things about all the things, and this is why we need to have each other and not be in fucking competition, but instead recognize we're stronger together. I could get spicy today, Nancy.
I
Not
love it.
spicy like that, but spicy like food.
Um,
I have no idea how it's supposed to happen in my life right now. I mean, I'm trying to keep food happening and, the house not being a total shithole.
hashtag life.
And I get the wheel open here.
Jesus, take the wheel.
Hi.
Patty, why the fuck did we start this?
Hi. 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 Do you think the camera's on me?
It's gonna be in the video. You know I'm gonna stick that in there somewhere.
Hi. Okay. You,
Burn it
you gotta
down.
stop. You gotta stop. And so today we're going to be covering the. Is that bad?
No, I'm good. Go.
Why?
Nothing.
As we go with today, fuck. The wheel addresses methods of what the fuck in the last two. Welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patti, and I make this podcast with my sister Nancy. We grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. But we're also nerdy about history and culture, but critical of religion. So get ready to get mad or to nod your head in agreement as we embark on today's topic. So today we're going to finish the Wheel of Power and Control from Empathy Paradigm Therapy. The wheel addresses methods of abuse employed by cults and other churches of high control. See our last two episodes for the rest of the wheel. So in this episode, we're going to be covering sex and gender control along with financial control.
The word masturbation is popping out to me right now. The first one, we have sex and gender control. Gender specific expectations, such as women being submissive, modest, their value comes from whoever they married, and motherhood. Men are supposed to be masculine, strong. Their value comes from being a leader and provider. The explicit rules about marriage and high control situations, leadership and family structure, limited sexual expression, such as things like purity culture. That can be an episode all its own. Rules about sex, things like masturbation, monogamy, heterosexuality, and so on. Villainization of non-conformity, if you don't conform to our ways, which is the way people have always done it, and you should keep doing it that way without question. Erasure and villainization of non-conformity, things like refusal to legitimize the LGBTQ community and their identities. Miseducation and fear-mongering, such as terms like feminism, the gay agenda, things that have been associated with something terrible, yet they aren't terrible. It's just that people have hijacked the terms. So we'll go over that. Propaganda coming back again. Where do you want to start, Pats? How about women being modest and submissive? I mean, this whole section here we could cover. So women being submissive, modest, their value comes from marriage, and then women expected to have children, and their value is based on their motherhood. You want to start us off?
Sure. I mean,
Plenty to cover.
the thing is, this one, we've been talking in this series about how these items show up in the world, not just in situations that we would deem high control. And this one is a huge one of that because that is just the patriarchy, right? Like everything you just read in there is rooted in the idea that men are the leaders and women are, made of a rib and therefore like the support
Bullshit.
and not someone who can be thought of as an autonomous individual. So we may have covered some of this when we were talking about loss of autonomy, but this is really specifically loss of autonomy when it comes to one's own body and one's own sexuality.
Right.
And the
We
gender, right? So maybe this is a good moment for definitions of sex versus gender, right? Because
Mhm.
when we talk about sex, we're talking about like physical characteristics, right? When we talk about sex. So that is to be a female or a male, right? That goes along with the sex. But then when you talk about gender, man and woman, that is more about the role that they or the way they see themselves. We're talking more about the way that someone chooses to show up in the world, right? Like what traditional roles um do they either like energetically kind of connect with or find themselves filling, right? So gender is this thing that we say is a social construct, meaning that yes, we recognize that in the vast majority of people, there's a not all of them, obviously, though, there's a binary in the sex organs. And so that was where we came up with male and female, although obviously the lines are not that clear. But when it comes to gender, that's really more addressing the parts that we've added on to the fact that we come out of the womb with different genitalia, right? So the fact of, oh, someone came out with a vulva, therefore, for so long, we've done things like you get dolls and you're going to grow
Mhm.
up and learn how to cook and sew, right? So it's that
Yep.
tradition carrying forward, but thinking somehow that that's an ideal or a requirement for admission into a church or, making it to heaven or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, here's ways I can be in the world and here's a great way I found for myself to be in the world. It's like recognizing that that church then is trying to come in and say, no, you can't be gay. You can't, um, you know, find other whatever attractive. It's like it's a little bit that villainization of normal human behavior again, right?
Mhm.
It's like saying you're not okay the way you are.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, we've seen that idea over and over in this wheel of you're not okay as you are, who you are. You need us to make you okay, to make you safe, to make you all the things.
I think even until recently, I didn't realize there was a big difference between sex and gender. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's fair. Like it's kind of a new cultural conversation, and I'm sure that there are people who would disagree with the way I just defined it. So that's okay, to think that there's one right definition is never going to be the case.
Right.
Right? We're
Yes.
we're all using words not based on their definition. We're using them, we'll talk about this a lot too. We're using them based on the feelings they cause for us. But at some point, then when those words get hijacked by like the far right or something, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, nope, now we need to get down to definitions and understand what we're actually talking about. So that's maybe a little bit of a sidebar, but in general, when we're talking about this sex and gender control, it really is um kind of getting to the heart of who you are to control you. Like I am a woman, right? Well, okay, let's make sure you identify yourself as a woman. And then we're going to have all of these things in place in front of you so that you understand, okay, you're a woman. Now you need to do this, this, and this to be acceptable. And if you don't, you're not acceptable and you're not fulfilling what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like one more layer, one more label to add in order to use it as a whip.
Well, that part I understand, but then, like, say, if you're asking a child, which way do I identify? Are you male or female or non-binary? How are they supposed to know? What's the criteria? You say people say it's a social construct, and that is where I get a little confused. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean when I was a kid, I did a lot of masculine things? Actually, I still do, but I'm very much a woman. I feel like a woman, maybe
Yeah.
not the most feminine,
Right.
but
Well, you're obviously female. We know that.
okay.
But
So
you're
you're
a
saying,
woman, but you identify as a woman.
okay, so that's where I was making the disconnect. Okay, so you're saying,
Yeah,
yeah,
I know.
sex is biologically male and female, but the
Well,
terms. Yeah, man and woman would be, you're saying the social construct,
Right,
right?
right. So we've attached
Okay.
all these ideas to what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And you can see a lot of those in
Yes.
the high control thing there. And so this is where it shows up society wide. It's just that as soon as, oh, and it's changing society wide too. But
Yeah.
that's where you start to see that a church of high control can take that sort of cultural understanding and make it fucking law, right? And then that's when you get a problem because they're taking something that is a culturally understood and in this case culturally changing thing
Mm-hmm.
and trying to hold to some old ideal, right? So I mean that's when we get the word like the word conservative versus progressive. I mean that's the whole thing. It's like a progressive person, not using like big P big C. um a progressive person is wanting to make steps forward and see what needs to change and try to do that. And the idea
We
of
all should be doing that.
conservatism, well, we all should be, and that's how I feel too, but I am a progressive. But when you look at things like what a conservative is, like the idea is, oh, we think there is an ideal that's already set and we really want to keep things the way they are, right? Conservative, like conserving what is and
Mm-hmm.
preserving the order of the day,
That
right?
makes sense. Yeah.
And so that to me is the main like just underlying how do I see the world difference there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And those same conservative Christian type ideals usually fall under what they're talking about here with the gender specific expectations, which
Yes.
includes women being submissive,
Hmm.
the modesty, covering their bodies up because apparently we tempt men and it's our fault when the men get turned on. Their value comes from marriage. We've seen that all throughout history that a woman, even in the Bible, how many wives are not even mentioned by name? It's always so and so's wife. They're identified by the man they married. And then
Wait,
motherhood. So,
but that part, like the identified by the man they married, that is definitely not just a Church of High Control thing. When you
right.
went on ancestry.com, that's what you found. It was like you could find the men most of the time, but it was like, oh, he married someone from Sweden.
And it was keeping the name too, Patty. Yeah, they wanted to keep more or less the name.
Well,
But
that's
wherever the
patriarchal
woman,
as fuck to begin with. So,
well, right.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I
Which
think a
I
lot
would
of
say
people
the
are
patriarchy is an organization, or not, it's not an organization. I would say the patriarchy is a concept of high control.
well, yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, yeah, I guess that is kind of like a duh, right? But to be able to call out the way we behave.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess
But
we talked about this a little bit in the autonomy section, the bodily autonomy piece of, well, I want to have control of your body, so I'm going to control what you can wear on your body or show of your body. Like
mhm,
that's now up to the organization and not up to me, the fucking body owner. That's
right.
not cool.
Well, you know what I think it is though too, Patty. I mean, in the patriarchal society, men like this that want their women to be submissive and modest. They want their woman, the woman associated with them, to be those types of women, but yet they will go after in secret the women that are exact opposite of that. The ones that do not submit, the ones that are not modest, because their wives and such are seen as the property, an extension of them. It used to be that maybe, I don't know, the fucking Shahs of Persia and ancient civilizations, these men in power, kings and such, would have multiple wives and as many children as possible because it was seen as it paralleled their power and status, depending on how many kids they had.
As people figured out, well, okay, remember there was like the days of the goddess religions, right? When
Mhm.
they understood that the flow of blood from a woman meant that she was going to swell up and explode with life at some point after that, right? And so that was a revered thing. And it's like somehow I feel like humans figured out it was about, the semen that made that happen. And something about that like flipped things where the men then were like, well, it's we're the drivers of life then, aren't we? You're just
Mm.
the vessel,
Mhm.
right? And that idea somehow put women in a subservient role.
In Hinduism, it's actually quite common to still see, yeah, the lifeblood of the woman in their rituals, their practices, in their statues, in their temples.
Right. I mean, yeah, there's definitely evidence of societies all over the world that revered women as the goddess.
What's one of the earliest deities? It has to be Inanna, right?
I think so.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know if we could ever narrow down what the first deity was, but there
No.
were a shitload of gods and goddesses created, idealized, before, you know, the Hebrew god came onto the scene. So,
Oh, for sure. I mean, even at
so
the
why wouldn't we
time that
go
the
further back?
yeah, when the Hebrew God came on the scene, it was like it was just joining a existing pantheon of Canaanite gods.
Right.
It wasn't like, well, and then I mean, wasn't that just a genius move though? Of like, well, there's all these gods and these people have their god and these people have their god. And it's like, well, what if we declare our God to be above their gods? Like, I don't know.
Ching! It's
Yeah.
worked.
Well, right along with patriarchy, though, is probably something that most of us still take for granted, um, which is things like monogamy, right? I mean, that's a measure of control, even as it is. To
Right.
say that two people have to commit their bodies to each other forever and always with never
Yeah.
being able to go outside of that, right? And I think that there's healthy things happening in our society where we're starting to recognize that, oh, each person is an autonomous individual and maybe doesn't have to be subservient to another person, even if it's sort of like co-subservience in a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe we're at a place where we can grant more autonomy and reduce our control over each other's bodies in general. And I
Well,
think that is happening, not in churches of high control. It's just happening in society.
years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, that's a nice fantasy, never going to happen. And I'm still kind of on the fence. I'm like, I don't know if everyone's going to, accept those ideas. But my question is, if somebody else wants to have an open marriage and, fuck whoever they want, I don't see how that impacts anyone else's life in any way. If you
Mhm.
are with a group of consenting adults saying, hey, I'm in a marriage, but I don't just sleep with my partner, I sleep with other people and they do the same. That's totally up to them.
Right.
I mean,
And at some point, that means we have to take responsibility for ourselves as humans, as adults, that is outside of a church of high control, right? Because a church of high control or society in general gives these guardrails. And we know the rates of cheating, of not
mhm,
being faithful. And so one might start to think, oh, maybe that isn't actually a natural set point for all of humans.
right.
And
And,
and it's about starting to see and honor the human animal
mhm,
instead of trying to hold to some ideal that an imagined deity has set forth for us
yeah.
and executed by that deity's, prophets or whatever. I mean, it it's impossible for me not to see all of that as a control measure, whether it's to get more money coming in the offering plate, or whether it's to make sure that demographics are understood to raise sales at Target. It's probably not super great for sales if people are gay and poly and living life in the way they want. They're not going to fit into the buckets that advertisers want us to fit in. And sorry if that's taking it too big, but I really feel like that plays into the drive to keep us all fitting the roles of gender, the roles within a marriage, the roles that we're
Mhm.
socially and religiously expected to, because it serves other people's idea of what they want to see in the world versus what would actually be good for more people, right? Like we might be on the surface behaving and making people think at our church that we're doing all the right things, but just the fact that we've seen all of these super conservative evangelical preachers get caught in the airport bathroom with another dude, or or having affairs, or paying for their girlfriends to get abortions, and all of that stuff. I think we could be like, oh, they're just bad, they're just evil, but like, no, I don't think they are. I think they've been in a situation of high control that does not honor their actual human needs. And
Mhm.
so they're preaching the one thing out of the side of their mouth and using their mouth for other things on the other side. It's like, because those needs are going to try to get themselves met, right? And
Yes.
which is why if we honor it, see it, honor it, we can find ways to address those human needs that are healthy and don't hurt people.
Humanity comes out sooner or later.
Right. And it just
You-
makes me think a little bit of in our Unpack It series, we've been reading The Missing Dimension in Sex by Herbert W. Armstrong. And he is so, so determined to make sure people don't think of themselves as animals, like super villainizing the
Mhm.
idea of being animal-like or having instincts even. And
Yeah.
I don't understand it. It's so sad to ignore the human animal that much, because it literally, it's crazy making. It causes it causes us to behave in ways that are not in our best interest, that are not in the best interest of the people that we love, that are not in the best interest of the people we choose to interact with to get our needs met, right? Like, oh, and that can really run the gamut of like people lashing out in ways to get their needs met that are either harmful to a partner or literally harmful to the person that they're fucking, like being able to see what we actually need and address it in a healthy way is so important for the well-being of all of us.
Well, and recognizing what our needs are, a lot of times those are squashed, and we're not even supposed to think about what our needs are because we have this system in place that tells us you're this, you're this. If you think outside of this, you're wrong. But
Right.
then humanity finds a way to get around. They find loopholes every single time. They find loopholes, whether it's the poop hole or the poop hole
Exactly.
loophole. I didn't have sex. I'm still a virgin. He stuck it in my butt.
I know. Well, that's exactly it, right? So that's the thing. There was that happening, maybe still is, among evangelical girls, is
Mhm.
they were starting to have anal sex because they thought, well, then I'm not doing it according to how God doesn't want me to do it, right? And so this is what I mean when I am talking about how we don't have proper risk assessment, and we are so thwarted in making our healthy choices for ourselves when we're trying to abide by rules that aren't seeing the whole picture, when the rules are about control and not about benefit for all.
Look at nuns. Told you can't have sex with a man, really? They're gonna fuck each other.
I've known people who were real down with hanging out with the lesbian nuns.
I actually got drunk with nuns once. So when I was up in Madison living there, my husband and I owned the Indian restaurant, but he had some side jobs on the side. So he's a good business guy. He does things like catering jobs because it's actually pretty easy. You know, you get to go to these parties and all he's doing is serving alcohol to people. At the end of the night, he gets wads of cash. He gets to take a lot of the opened liquor home and he gets to partake in all the food that's there. Like, fuck yeah, catering is, especially when it comes to events, catering's a great job. Well, one of these events he was working, he was the server for a monastery in Madison. So it was a bunch of nuns. And he invited me. He called me up. He's like, oh, tell me about this event. And he calls me over there. I'm like, okay, okay. I'm going to pretend that I'm kind of a member that shows up and came up with some kind of story. So I just went in there, got all the drinks and food, and I got to hang out with these really cool women that were nuns, and I even got to flirt with Suwan when like my husband right in front of me serving his drinks. I looked to these nuns, we're like, oh man, they hired some really cute waiters, didn't they? And they agreed, like, oh, he's very cute.
Oh my God, you're bad.
Okay, there's my getting drunk with nuns story, all right? It wasn't that bad. I just I showed up, I wasn't a member, but these women were super cool. Of course, they're still human too. They have needs. They recognize a sexy waiter walking past. It was fun. It was fun. It's kind of like the whole, what do you call it? The whole stranger fantasy where you meet your partner at a bar and you pretend you don't know each other and just like, oh my God, that's some of the best sex after a night like that.
But I'm glad you're mentioning that now because those types of things, to have that fantasy and to play, kind of have those play things that you talk about and do with a partner in public or private is normal and healthy and fun. And that's one of the things on that list is the villainization of things that
Mhm.
are normal. And now I
Yep.
have to preface it though to say that like on the whole, you and I consider ourselves straight. And so the LGBTQ experience, in terms of the villainization or erasure,
Mhm.
was not something that we experienced. And so, there's not as much that I feel like I personally can speak to
Mhm.
about that. But I do see how intense the choosing to ignore or pretend that they're less than happens to people who are in the LGBTQ community, and how hurtful that is to have who they are, who they see themselves to be found out at some point in their childhood that like, oh, the way I am, the way I think is bad and I'm bad. God thinks I'm bad. God thinks I'm the worst. Like that's, whew, not okay.
And yet, there are still people in this community that are Christians. Our friend Joel is one of them, but I'm going to go ahead and use the example of our mutual friend. Her name, I'm just going to use the name Becker. And for anyone who's actually read my novel, the character Becker is based upon this woman. I knew her before she technically came out. We were going to the same evangelical church at the time. Yes, I went to a mega church. We'll talk about that later. Okay. But she hadn't come out as gay. In fact, I don't even think she realized that's what she was. It was pretty obvious to me, but she used to look at, say, she once saw two women holding hands when they were walking past, and she kind of sneered at them. This again, this was before she came out, but that judgment that was instilled in her, we were both going to one of these typical televangelist mega churches, and so her mindset was to judge those women, even though that's who she was. And now she's finally come out. I think she's still with some church, some particular church, but again, this is what we tell ourselves and be like, no, the church is completely against this, but yet I still kind of believe it, so I'm going to stay in it. Maybe it's a comfort thing. I don't know. I don't know. I remember seeing that transition from her being not out to her coming out. And I think people's comments don't bother her as much as maybe some of her girlfriends, since she is, the more masculine one in their relationships. But just to put yourself in an organization that is constantly saying you are an abomination, I just don't know how that works. My husband doesn't know how it works. Our wonderful friend Joel, we love him. He's flaming gay, and yeah, he's very Christian. I don't know how that works. My husband said, how much longer is he going to put himself through this with all the people that say the nasty things about him that they do, and then they use the Bible to justify it, because yes, we know there's passages in there that speaks to this very topic. But I don't know how we get around that apologetics wise, but some
Maybe that's because it was originally made as a book of high control to begin with. I personally believe that was its point from its inception during the Roman Empire, but I know I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist about that one.
Patty, do you remember that time we went to that gay club in Minneapolis? We just danced the night away, had a great time. Everyone thought we were lovers. We're just like, no, we're sisters.
There was a really sweet gay boy that thought I was just tits that night, and we had a great time hanging out.
I love the whole LGBT community. We love you guys. We love you so much. And they go through so much hatred too. Okay, getting back to that topic, since we're on it, somehow I find these random things on YouTube, and there was this Christian dude. I'm not going to say his name, I'm not going to give him any attention, but he records himself literally preaching the gospels to, the most woke people he can find. He's invading pride celebrations, pride festivals, saying how much God loves them and all this, and completely disregarding how they feel. You remember, like last time when we were in Seattle, we were walking past, I think, Pike Place Market, and there was a doomsday preacher out there preaching how sinful we all were, just ruining everybody's time. I'm like, you're not doing anybody any favors if you're trying to get people to your religion. You're not doing a very good job. There are atheists out there that are complete dickheads too and make everyone else look like an idiot. The only thing we have in common with them is that they're just not convinced a God exists. Same with us. But
Right.
anything else that person believes is not set in stone. But let's touch on the next one. So, miseducation and fear mongering. So, examples like using terms like feminism and gay agenda. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's really valid. It's that whole thing that we've identified that leaders of high control churches do, where they take a word or a phrase and they make it negative. They attach things to
Mm-hmm.
it to make sure that it's generally thought of as negative. Right? So feminism, like objectively, I would say feminism is good, but that's going based on my definition of feminism is the fight for equality between the genders,
Yeah.
right? And so to me, that's a good thing. But it's been kind of twisted into feminism is women not wanting to stay in their place. Who
And we
decided
know
their
who
place?
decided their place.
I mean, that's entirely what the church's goal is to keep people in their place, right? Because they're easier to control when they know their boundaries. And I don't disagree with that in general, that all of us need to kind of understand where we belong and what our limits are in our life, but they should be
Mhm.
healthy and shared and understood together as a community, not hey, I'm the boss and I'm going to tell all my little marionette puppets what they can and can't do. Right. So there's a
Marionette
big
puppet.
difference because it's either all these individuals understanding, hey, I'm part of a bigger community and I follow these rules because they make sense for keeping me safe, for keeping the other people safe, for making sure we all have what we need. Like I
Mhm.
can totally get on board with rules. Like I would sometimes consider myself kind of an anarchist, and I am totally on board with rules. The idea that if we all feel safe, secure, loved, supported, we are probably going to be just fine doing whatever we want because if we have we're probably going to be fine doing whatever we want, whatever we see right in our own eyes. Because if our eyes are fucking clear, we will know what we need to do to take care of me and you and them over there. Because we'll realize we're all in it together and we're not against each other. We don't have to separate ourselves out into an us and them. And that's the whole thing, right? The sex and gender control is I need to put a little box around you and keep you packaged up so that you are mine. And
Patty,
that is what I cannot do anymore. I can't accept it. I can't.
Patty, tell me how you really feel.
Oh, I'm not even that fired up yet.
I had a job with early on in my career before I got into human resources. I used to manage hotels. I was a front office manager. There was another gentleman that was also a front office manager. We kind of shared the space. I had been there longer than him. I put in a lot more hours. I made significantly less than he did. You know why? Well, I'm a woman, and he had his tongue so far up the buttholes of all those in charge, the entire executive team. I mean, he would go out for drinks with them and everything while I would be stuck there working, making far less than he did.
Dude figured out how to take full advantage of that patriarchy.
And I was more than willing to, work the overtime because it was early on in my career.
I mean, this is
Ah.
why in Iceland, I forget when this happened, There was a day in Iceland in the last 20, 30 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where the wage disparity was understood, because women were making, 75 cents on the dollar type thing, or Icelandic dollar, whatever that is. Um, and they're a small enough country, and they had enough solidarity going on that there was this day at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I mean, I can't say every, but every fucking woman in Iceland was like, oh, looks like I've reached the point in the day where for what my pay is. Looks like I've reached the point in the day that my pay covers. And so, see you later. How are you going to do if every woman in the country walks out? And that's what they did, and they fucking won.
Next one is economic control. So let's start with the expected investment includes things like your donation of money, time, and resources to the particular group, obligating to share possessions with the group, and required volunteer labor without compensation. The expected investment, I mean, donation of money, you're expected in some religious organizations to give a particular tithe. Usually it's anywhere from 10 to 30%. I know in the Worldwide Church of God, it was as high as 30%. Is that correct?
Right. That's how I've heard it estimated because there was the 10% tithe, which is, rock solid, and most churches
Right.
deal with that 10% tithe. And so that's not that uncommon, even though I would say it's still a measure of high control. But
Right.
right, the Worldwide Church of God had that. And then there was a second tithe that needed to be something that you saved for yourself, and it was to be spent at the Feast of Tabernacles. And then the third tithe was every certain number of years. And in theory, the church said they were using that to help church members in need. So,
Okay.
but then there was always like special offerings where at holy days they would pass the plate around again, and I always understood that that was kind of like a in addition to, like, we're expecting you to just mail in your big 10% check, but why don't you put some extra in here because, we prepared this whole service for you today. But I think that's maybe on the high. Well, it's not even necessarily on the high end because if you want to get really deep into some of the big cult things, right, those are just entirely sucking up 100% of everything,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
When you get into like communes and things like that, where you might have people working off site, but then all of their paycheck just comes right back to the group.
When you live on a commune, absolutely. You don't own anything for the most part.
Right.
Everything belongs to the commune, the leader.
But isn't that more biblical? I think that's more biblical. That's what
It is
Jesus talked
biblical.
about, selling all you have and bringing it to the group. But that's a different situation, right? Like if you look at what he was saying, it's a little bit more like not bringing it to me, the pastor, me, the minister, but bringing it to the Christians, all of the group that wants to live together in harmony, so like it is different. But then to know that that's in the Bible of like we could all pool our money and sell everything and give it to us and we'll all work together is just like so ripe for people like David C. Pack to then do that still and have biblical justification for I want you to go sell all your things when really he's just fucking over generations of people's families from, property and funds. Hmm.
I had a question. I feel like our parents had to do some sort of volunteer work for the Worldwide Church of God. I seem to remember something that they had to partake in, like to help out the organization. Am I wrong about that? Like it was required of its members to do some function.
I feel like I remember both
I
of our
remember
parents
that.
helping with something at the church, like for church services. I
Mm-hmm.
think like whether it was making tapes of the service or definitely there was it's not wrong, right? There was this idea that everyone helps pick up the chairs at the end. And so there was like actual schedules with who would help set up the chairs and things like that. So I don't think that's wrong to have a way for a community to share the load, to share the work. Um, but when it's all of a sudden you can't be part of the group unless you do this, it starts
Yeah.
being, or like you won't be loved. if you do this, or if you don't do this, that's where it starts getting weird. But I mean, maybe it's worth talking about that line, right? Because if we have a community that's, in theory, not high control, that means you're expecting everybody in that community to have kind of a shared vision for what we all want to work toward together.
Mhm.
And there needs to be openness for like a healthy debate about about the choices we're making right now and whether those choices are good or bad for getting us toward the goal that we as a community have defined for ourselves. I think it comes down to the ability for someone in a group working on a shared goal, if they feel like their voice is heard and considered and that they aren't being forced to do those things, that is how I think something that, is commonly exploited in a high control way. You can start to build in those things that make it not high control, right? To make sure that each person in that group has a voice, has autonomy, um, is heard, all of those things.
Well, I had a question on the opposite end of the spectrum then. How do we get like people that are in a specific group, say it's just a little community where everyone kind of chips in, but you do have maybe one or two people that aren't contributing, like they're just kind of freeloading. It's like I don't want to diminish people that do need government resources because they're having trouble finding a job or anything like that. And so they do need resources to help them out, whether it's food stamps or anything. But there are legit people that take advantage of systems like that so they don't have to work and such. Like, how do we ensure that that kind of stuff doesn't happen?
What you're bringing up is kind of the major thing that is a counterpoint to the idea of communism is one of those words, of course, that people have like big reactions to, but the idea that we could all work together, and that everyone knows that person who would be the freeloader of like, oh, great, then I guess I don't have to work. But my
Yeah.
my counterpoint to that idea, because I don't think that's wrong, and I think, we are humans and that will always be a part of some of us, um because we are animals, and one of the things that animals do is they conserve their energy, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just a biological longevity thing of like, if I can find a way to get what I need with lower energy output, then that's good. And so there will be humans who can't quite catch on to the goal of the group and may only look out for number one. But I would contend that that is a function of their traumas and their
Mm.
the things that they have suffered that made them so self-protective that they kind of can't connect to the broader group as understanding that that is a safety net for them if they contribute to it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense.
So I know that idea that like, oh, well, if we switch over to socialism, communism, whatever, people will just freeload and never do anything. And I get that. Yeah,
Mm,
like the way we are right
some.
now and how we've been taught to be so expecting of all the things coming our way, all the nice things here in our, first world life in the United States. I get that that really would be a problem, but I would contend that, a generation or two into that kind of thing, it could totally change because we would not be making more people who were so afraid of not having enough or, enough resources, enough love, enough all of those things. Like if all of those needs are more met, I think those people are more likely to get the joke and join in and help out and be part of the community versus, I think the people who would mooch and try to get out of work are the people who haven't felt like they're part of the community and they are,
Mhm.
I said it before, but like they're in a self-protective mode that isn't
Right.
compatible with building a supportive community. So, yeah, so that's my answer to it is that like, yeah, it is a problem, but it's a bigger thing with us and not just about, oh, humans are just lazy, because I just don't think that's true.
I think we're moving on to financial dependence. Emphasis on trusting fully in the group's or God's provision, control over savings, budgeting, investments, and job types, And lastly, restrictions on women's education and employment. I think in Worldwide Church of God, they forbid things like investments, didn't they?
I don't know if they forbid it. I'm pretty sure Stanley Rader was doing all the investing he wanted.
Of
But
course.
what I think was the natural consequence of the Worldwide Church of God asking for so much money in tithes is that if they're simultaneously telling everyone that the world's going to end, then why would people invest? Right? Like they probably wouldn't have even had to say, don't invest because a lot of people wouldn't have had enough money to invest when that much of their money is already going to the church,
Right.
right? Right. And then, right, I already said it, but that extra layer of, well, the world's going to end. So I don't need to save money for my kids' college. I don't need to save money for my retirement because Jesus is coming. Jesus is my retirement plan. And I think that is pretty prevalent in fundy Christian churches, evangelical churches, etc.
And that makes sense. I think a lot of the offshoots actually, yeah, forbid this type of thing.
And I know from listening to Durante, there was a session that I joined him for on his channel where they were talking about in some of the Black churches he's been a part of the idea of looking wealthy, like looking like you had made it, having all of the right shoes, hats, cars, whatever, was a big deal. And so people would do not smart things with their finances in order to have those big ticket items that made them look the way that then it looked like God was blessing them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's not a tithe, but it has the same effect on a, churchgoer's financial situation. And it's promoting a look and conformity to the group. I wanted to talk a little bit about the trusting in God's provision thing. I feel
Mm.
like,
Yep.
yeah, I feel like that idea, I did not hear that much in the Worldwide Church of God because I actually think they wanted us to not quite have enough. Like, I think that's how they
Yeah,
kept us, under a thumb. But
that makes
in
sense.
the, yeah, in the evangelical world, though, there was a whole lot more of that, like, let's just trust in God kind of thing for direction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and trust God to provide. There's always testimonies and things of, I was down to my last $5 and I didn't know how I was going to pay my rent that month. And then I went to church and this happened, that happened, and all of a sudden I had 3 times the amount I needed for rent in my account and God provided. Right? I mean, these are the stories that are incredibly
Ah.
common and probably mostly BS. But they keep people hoping and believing, and it keeps people who are destitute and without hope in a place of looking to something that actually isn't going to provide what they need, but the carrot is dangled and they're following
Mhm.
it.
That brings me back to evangelical days. I remember attending sermons where the pastor was saying, "Oh, the more money you give, the more blessings you'll have." And so people were just
Yes.
throwing money in like crazy, and then he'd be going around touching people's heads as if it was something significant.
Oh my God. Do
Oh,
you remember?
evangelicalism is sometimes worse. Oh,
Do
the
you, I
cringiness.
I agree. I agree. I think there are things about evangelicalism that are actually more insidious. Like, do you remember, right? Because like Worldwide Church of God was like, yeah, all of this is gross and terrible and yuck, and we're just going to show you and make you swallow it. It's also kind of interesting to see those stories in an evangelical context where a lot of evangelical churches are kind of like upper middle class circle jerks. Like,
Oh
look
yeah.
how much God has blessed us, we're all going to just sit here in our wealthy clothes in our expensive building that will never open up to homeless people
Gated
and
communities.
gated communities and pat ourselves on the back for being fucking rulers of the universe. And then they put
Fucking
this
vomit, dude.
and then they put this layer of God's provision and God's care and love for them because they first love, because he first loved us or whatever, right? Yeah, and so, it's not as stated as Armstrong was with the whole elect thing, but they are absolutely
Mm.
promoting electness. And look how easily evangelical churches started taking on right-wing talking points round about 2016, right? Because that, like, I'm elect, I've got my upper middle class suburban life kicking, and that's obviously ideal. And so all those other people that don't have the life like I have must be doing it wrong. And so therefore, all the things I believe are correct, and I'm going to wave my gun around and
That kind of goes into our next bullet point here about promised prosperity. So promised rewards for loyalty to the group. You keep putting in your tithes and your time, then you'll get these rewards, which falls directly into the next bullet point.
the thing they talked about in the evangelical churches I was a part of was the idea that what you put in the offering plate, God will return to you tenfold. Like just literally saying, you put in $5, God will give you 50. You put in $100, God will give you 1,000, right? Like
All the way
they're
off.
literally saying that. Like, did that ever happen for people? Yeah, probably not. But if there was one or two stories over the years that they could point to that they thought actually happened, well, they're stuck. They're no longer seeing reality about that.
Oh, I had a pastor once in that mega church I was attending back when I was in the military. This would have been like 2005 to 2008-ish time period. And the pastor said that he had cancer, but yet he prayed about it. Everyone else prayed about it in his congregation. All of a sudden, by God's miracle, it was gone. Yet we have no proof, no evidence that that ever took place. Everyone in the church was so amazed by that and what God, Jesus did. And so they gave more money to the church and all that. Amazing.
Oh, yikes.
This is the same dude that stood in front of people and said, I can give you the gift of talking in tongues. You just have to want it. And he would touch people's heads and he would start speaking some sort of whatever fucking gibberish, and he would just have the people repeat it. And he said that was talking in tongues. I'm like, no, the people are actually just repeating what you're saying. I don't know how I could have been in such fucking denial for so long just because I wanted some sort of sense of community, people where I felt like I belonged. And I had to go through this absolute Christian evangelical hell to get there. Guess what? When I stopped pretending that I was a Christian, because I never actually was, I never believed that there was gods and goddesses, deities. Once I stopped pretending, those friends were gone. They were
Mm-hmm.
gone from my life completely. So how good of friends were they? I have so many friends today that actually are Christian. Does all this shit matter to them? No, they're some of my greatest friends.
There
I
was
think,
one more thing here that when we're talking about evangelical churches and they have their prosperity gospel, right? Like health and wealth, like you make all this money and that's how you know that God has his favor on you and he has blessed you. And it's a really good way for people who are already rich to claim God's favor, right? All of that. But
yep.
what that can be used for further is yet another type of high control group, which is MLMs that like interlace really well with some of that evangelical stuff.
I was duped for a while, okay? Yes, I was with Quickstar. I was selling Amway shit and I was really shitty at it. Yeah.
It's not really meant to be for people to be good at unless you're good at manipulating other people.
Correct. That's why I sucked at it.
Right. It's meant to either you're a manipulator and you're going to get other people to buy it, or you're going to be one of those that just puts yourself into financial ruin because you're trying to keep up the quarterly minimums. And so you're just buying it all yourself.
Right.
And that is what they count on. And they don't give a shit how many people's financial futures they ruin because they tell themselves they're doing something good.
I
But
miss
all of,
grandma's
hmm?
I miss grandma's 80th birthday because of that shit.
Yeah.
Somehow they convinced me my mind was vulnerable enough at that period of time to say, oh, this is a great thing that you're not going to your brother's wedding, that you're not going to so and so's birthday, because this is more important. This is what you should focus on. This is your future right here. This is God right here. They can all go fuck themselves with a sandpaper bag for all I care.
Here's what I remember, Nancy, about that. I
Okay, share.
remember that in that time when you were with Amway, you were probably the most floaty in your life in terms of like, knowing where you belonged and what you were about, you know?
Yep.
So you were vulnerable to it. But then I remember being in the car with you coming back from somewhere and you had a CD, one of their CDs
Mm.
that was like play this and here's your indoctrination kind of CDs. And I was far enough deconstructed by that point that I was like, oh shit,
Mm.
because I was seeing it and I got it enough at that point. But I remember them saying, well, okay, so here's the thing about skipping what you skipped for MLM based things. It was them again, probably without the people in it realizing this is what they were doing, but they were undermining your community that you currently had, right? Friends and family. They were
Mm-hmm.
undermining that in order to insert themselves and your team, right? Your selling team
Mm-hmm.
as your new family, as your community. Because in that CD we were listening to, there was like a lot of talk of other people aren't going to want you to succeed. They're going to tell you this is a
Mm-hmm.
lie. They're going to tell
Yep.
you this doesn't work. They just are jealous and don't want you to make it because that scares them, because they think you're going to outpace them. But here's what you can do if you have all this money, you can help other people, you can give back. And their very next breath was about their new 6,000 square foot house. I saw what they were doing in that moment.
You got into evangelicalism before I did. It took me quite a while to like get into it. But you were just starting to get out as I was starting to get in because the
That's true.
military and that whole world just brought me back. It was that chick Vanessa that introduced me to Amway. And then I got sucked back into that world. I'm like, oh, well, most people that are in the military are also Christians. So, okay, this is my community now. And lo and behold, the moment I disagreed with them or found flaws in their ways of thinking, I was out of there. I was
Oh,
absolutely excommunicated, just like so many people are from organizations of high control.
right. Totally on that wheel.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm glad I didn't do it for very long. I had to go through it, I guess, to be, it took a few years after that, but once I was just kind of out of that situation, I somehow came across Matt Dillahunty and Seth Andrews. The two of them, I found them on YouTube, started listening to them, and it was a slow process, but all of a sudden I'm like, wow, okay, the way I actually think is like
Yeah.
how these guys are talking. So I kept listening. I'm like, I didn't know there were other people out there that thought the same way I was. I thought there was something wrong with me. Like I couldn't get into this world of Christianity despite how hard I tried, whether it was the doomsday cult or it was evangelicalism. But all of a sudden, I found my people. I found my mind. I found where I belonged. I said, I don't believe in this. And there are people
Yeah.
out there that think the same way as me. That was
Yeah.
amazing. And it took me years.
And in some ways, you probably had to find a stable sense of community and some sort of support for you because that is what made you so vulnerable to those things to begin with. I mean, that's when I got into evangelicalism too. It's when, the church we grew up in and everything I knew was falling apart, and our dad was involved in this whole other thing that kind of was scary and didn't make sense. And our parents were moving, and I was moving every few months during college. And yeah, I needed something fucking stable underneath me. And so did you. Like, you went through hell trying to find your place in the world, and the evangelicalism stuck around kind of until you and I really reconnected as adults and started to really build an adult sister relationship together. And each of us found some stability with friends and partners and new
Mhm,
communities to be a part of. And like we started building our grown-up life.
mhm.
And that's when a church of high control no longer had a place.
I would say our parents abandoned us, Pats. Not that we would have wanted to stay in that situation anyway. It wasn't a healthy household. But the fact that they just left us to our own devices. I know you were off to college, but I was 17. I was on my own. God, I went through hell.
Yeah,
Um,
you did. Well,
yeah.
you have to recognize that that was like layered on top of a basis of emotional abandonment from the beginning because, they were there in a lot of ways. And yes, I will say probably did better than a lot of parents in the world have done. Our mom will
Mhm.
reinforce, so we didn't beat you. Well, no, I mean you did, but
No, you
not
did.
not like in the way we hear stories of. So okay, sure. But right, we were set up from the beginning to only rely on the church's obedience to the church's teachings as our way to stay safe and to be
Mhm.
secure.
Yeah.
And so when that went away, we floundered for a really long time and we're just kind of treading water, trying to figure it out and get to dry land again.
You find out who your real community is. If you don't agree with them, see how long they stick around.
Right. Like, and in some ways, when you take it to a personal level, well, personal all the way to a group of high control level, it's like, well, does this person want me around because life is better when we do life together?
Hmm.
And because we know that we're both contributing to each other's betterment? Or do they want me around because I add numbers, I add money to their bottom line, I build up their ego by
Hmm.
being in their group?
You validate them.
Yeah, right. And so I think it is a long process of learning as people how to not validate abusers in what they're doing because those abusers are trying to get their needs met too. And they're just
Hmm.
doing it in a pretty terrible way. And they're taking power that isn't okay for them to take, but because the people that they're taking the power from have been abused to the point that they don't know how to hold their own boundaries, that
Yeah.
whole system keeps ticking. Right. And so this is our job to, well, our job, not you and me, but like our job as humans, if we want to move forward and do better as humans, right? Like we need people who aren't lacking so hard for their basic emotional needs to be met.
Right. Yeah.
And so we need to be super intentional about how we create communities and be able to have those communities be informed about trauma and about the life experiences that are going to make that togetherness harder, right? Because even if we stop breaking each other emotionally, intentionally, like shit still happens. Things happen that are going to cause us to have traumas that we then try to uh heal in unhealthy ways if we don't know how to address them. Right.
Right.
So, for example, my one of my children was hit by a car at age 7, and the emotional ramifications of that for everyone in our family was huge.
It's
It
still going
almost,
on.
it's still going on. I mean, it almost broke all of us. Right. And so these are the things that thankfully we had enough of a connection as a family that despite all going through our own shit about it, we have had each other the whole time. And when we end up being in a place where we don't have that family, we don't have that community, we don't have that support, and then also life's asteroids come flying our way anyway, man, do we take on shit and cause more harm and everything trying to soothe the things that happened to us because we didn't have that community to give us a hug.
Pats, I would take one genuine hug over 100 disingenuous ones. Fuck them. I don't want their attention. I don't need anything from them. I know who belongs in my life, and I know whose life I belong in.
The word ohana I have always heard to mean uh the family you choose,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a lot of abuse that goes on with families and the power that parents inherently kind of have over their children gets used to the parents' advantage instead of for the betterment of everyone, right? So these things are important to know that even if you didn't have the right family that gave you what you needed, like there are ways to seek what you need through a community and understanding the things on this wheel and how they are used to hurt and control people can also tell us what we're watching out for when we're seeking a community. right? But,
Mm-hmm.
it's just hard because often that need for a community is so strong and so desperate so quickly that I think we find ourselves connecting with a community just because it exists and it's there and it's in front of us. And we feel like there maybe aren't other options, or we feel like we don't deserve better than that. And
Yeah.
that's maybe the most insidious part, that there's parts of the wheel that make you feel like you don't deserve better.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's parts of the wheel that make sure you don't get better.
This is right up your alley, Pets. Please keep studying this kind of stuff because it's where you belong.
Glad you thought it was good. I think I just rambled, but okay.
No, it's good ramble, Pats.
Well, I'm sure that Nancy and I could take these topics and extend it out into lots of more episodes, but for now, we'll call it good having covered the spiritual abuse wheel of power and control for the last 3 episodes. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe.
I'm not in the mood for anything celebratory right now. Peace out. See ya.
Peace out.